From historic Catholic churchyards holding ancient remains and disturbing paranormal infestations, to private burying grounds maintaining age-old traditions and their fair share of chilling ghost stories. Are you ready for the most haunted cemeteries in Louisiana? Number 5. Locust Grove Historic Site. Locust Grove State Historic Site, located just northwest of St. Francisville in West Feliciana Parish, is a historic site containing the cemetery and grounds of the Locust Grove Plantation, which was once owned by Anna E. Davis, sister to Confederate President Jefferson Davis. Land that now holds the site was initially settled through the 1790s by the French as Bayou Sara. Later, in 1809, our current St. Francisville was formally established. In 1816, Anna Eliza Davis would marry one Luther Lusk, the couple going on to produce 6 children while inhabiting the old plantation with extended family. Luther would pass on in 1833. In 1835, just 3 months after their wedding, Jefferson Davis would visit the plantation with his wife, Sarah, daughter to General Zachary Taylor. During their stay, the couple contracted malaria, resulting in Sarah perishing from her ailment and being laid to rest in Locust Grove. In 1937, the property was entrusted to the Office of State Parks by heirs of Anna Davis Smith, who was buried alongside many of her descendants and relatives. Impressively, Locust Grove remains an active family plot and as such is closed to the general public outside of tours. A second graveyard holding the remains of those enslaved on the plantation sits on adjacent land. However, this yard is privately owned, maintained, and guarded. Locust Grove holds more than 30 bodies, with the most recent burial having taken place in 1986. The cemetery is said to be haunted by the spirits of family members and workers who lived and died on plantation grounds, with many reporting orbs captured in most photographs, strange mists that float with seeming cognition, and the apparitions of several children, who are often heard laughing and playing from just out of sight. The most famous and commonly encountered spirit at Locust Grove is said to be Sarah herself, who many have identified through historic paintings. Sarah is most often sighted spying on the living from nearby tree cover, always seemingly keeping her distance. Number 4. Holt Cemetery. Holt Cemetery, located off of Rosedale Drive in the Navarre neighborhood of New Orleans, is a 7-acre historic Potter's Field cemetery featuring mostly below-ground burials, with the majority of its markers constructed and decorated by the families of the deceased. Land the cemetery sits on prior to its existence was utilized as a space to bury those who were poor in life and whom were left unclaimed in death. The graveyard itself was officially established in 1879 on 5.5 acres by Dr. Joseph Holt, a prominent city board of health official. Plots at Holt were kept free of charge for any who required interment, under the stipulation that their families tend their spaces into the foreseeable future. As previously mentioned, and differing from other yards of its time, most burials here were of the below-ground variety. Bodies were laid to rest in basic wooden coffins intended for quick decomposition, and, rather morbidly, reuse of plot space was common, usually by concurrent family members. In 1909, Holt Cemetery was expanded to its current 7 acres, and from 2013 to 2014, the grounds and caretaker's cottage underwent a long list of renovations, modernizations, and refurbishments, the final bill totaling in at around $500,000. Despite these extensive efforts, many of the yard's graves remained in a state of disrepair, with flooding literally unearthing a number of them, and with human remains frequently discovered throughout the area, above ground. Today, Holt and its grounds are operated by the city of New Orleans, though as per tradition, plot owners are responsible for maintaining their sites. Burials at Holt continue to this day. Along with the countless number of unmarked graves, graves disturbed by robbers, and those unearthed by floods, evidence has suggested the cemetery has also hosted a number of voodoo and Santeria rituals, suspected of opening portals to the other side. Across Holt, many report disembodied voices heard from the dark, inexplicable electronic malfunctions, high EMF levels, chilling EVPs, and the constant feeling of being watched or followed by an invisible presence. Holt contains the remains of a range of both unknown and known jazz musicians, including the likes of Jesse Hill, Charles Buddy Bolden, and many more. And at night, many passing report hearing a boisterous yet creepily cheerful jazz mashup, often accompanied by otherworldly vocals emanating from within, usually around midnight. Lastly, many visiting Holt have described orbs and spectral forms floating its expanse, shadowy figures that slink about watching the living from a distance, full-bodied apparitions in clothing spanning the eras, and cases of vehicles dying and refusing to restart, leaving those present stranded until morning. Number 3. Chalmette National Cemetery. Chalmette National Cemetery off West Bernard Highway and adjacent to Chalmette Battlefield in the Jean Lafitte National Historical Park and Preserve is a historic military cemetery estimated to hold around 16,000 bodies, though actual figures are a bit hazy due to mass burials of unknown soldiers. Land that holds Chalmette originally acted as part of the Chalmette Plantation, whose buildings were mostly destroyed through the Battle of New Orleans. The battle, lasting from January 8th to the 26th, was fought between British and American forces at the tail end of the War of 1812, with British forces suffering 285 casualties, while U.S. forces only sustained 13. In 1862, following the capture of New Orleans, the property would become a refugee camp for freed men and women, and later a burial ground for the formerly enslaved, right alongside Union and Confederate troops. In 1864, the city of New Orleans, who owned the land at the time, donated the burying grounds to the federal government for use as a national cemetery. Shortly after, the bodies of civilians and former slaves were removed and reinterred in the adjacent Freedmen's Cemetery. By 1868, 12,000 burials had taken place at Chalmette. Over its many years, countless bodies were removed and reburied elsewhere for aesthetic work and remodels. In 1929, the lodge, brick garage, and utility buildings were constructed. In 1933, the National Park Service was put in charge of operations at Chalmette. Chalmette holds the bodies of various soldiers ranging from the American Civil to Vietnam Wars, with only 4 of its current graves resulting from the War of 1812. Over the years, a number of local legends have formed surrounding Chalmette and its various hauntings, with many visiting reporting ghostly gun and cannon fire, disembodied voices, battle cries, and commands, shadowy figures sighted slinking about, and whispers that seemingly emanate from headstones. The spirit of a British soldier has been sighted wandering about and has even been known to nod or wink at the living. Reported all throughout the cemetery are orbs of light visible to the naked eye, strange fogs that appear above graves, ghostly figures captured in the backgrounds of photographs, high EMF levels, and disturbing EVPs. Many describe the constant feeling of being watched or followed, and on several disturbing instances, individuals have reported being touched or grabbed by invisible, yet icy cold hands. Also reported throughout Chalmette are extreme cold spots in the heat of summer, inexplicable gusts of wind seemingly isolated to the graveyard alone, and accounts of those deemed sensitive feeling as if they're being pulled down to the ground, as though gravitational pull throughout the cemetery is much higher. Number 2. St. Patrick's Cemetery. St. Patrick's Cemetery, divided by Canal Street and City Park Avenue in New Orleans, is a burying ground serving St. Patrick Catholic Church, a parish which was initially established to serve the Irish population and that now boasts the title of being the second oldest church in the historic city. The parish was originally formed humbly by Catholic Irish immigrants in 1833 out of a small wooden building. As it grew in popularity in 1840, our current church building was completed, with the church purchasing land from Gabriel Johnson a year later in 1841 for the purpose of the graveyard. The parish received the go-ahead from the city shortly after purchasing this land, but due to its layout in correlation with Canal Street and City Park Avenue, it was literally divided by the roads into separate sections, being St. Patrick's Cemetery's numbers 1, 2, and 3. Cemetery. In an effort to widen Canal Street in 1911, the city purchased a chunk of land from the church. However, only the sexton's house was relocated, with no burials or tombs disturbed. The Calvary Mausoleum was constructed at the rear of St. Patrick's Cemetery No. 1 in 1971. From 1978 to 1990, the cemetery and its associated church underwent a series of major restorations and repairs, ensuring their continued use. The All Saints Cremations Garden was opened for interment of cremated remains in 2018. Both St. Patrick Church and cemeteries remain open to burials to this day, with room should associated organizations so choose for further expansion. Tragically, many lost to the 1853 yellow fever epidemic were buried in Cemetery No. 1 in a rush, resulting in its haphazard design and greatly differing from No. 2's and 3's neat and tidy rows. Most of these victims were laid to rest unceremoniously in trench-like graves, with markers placed as close as they could get them to the crowded bodies. Many have reported sighting a range of spirits throughout Cemetery No. 1, suspected victims of the epidemic, some say searching for a proper resting place. The spirit of a woman with white hair has been sighted wandering all cemeteries and has been known to follow lone visitors before vanishing into thin air. Across the St. Patrick cemeteries, many report disembodied moaning and voices, chilling EVPs heard in the backgrounds of phone calls, and extreme cold spots. Orbs are commonly captured in photos and video. Strange mists have been sighted floating the grounds with seeming cognition, and shadowy figures are commonly spied peering out from behind markers. A number of full-bodied apparitions, all varying in age and era of clothing, have been encountered wandering the burying grounds, and a handful of disturbing stories tell of lone walkers being stalked by these presences, even off of cemetery property. Lastly, a ghostly group of teenagers clad in old-fashioned attire has been sighted by passers-by, leaning into the fence, chatting about issues long past. Number 1. Oakland Cemetery. Oakland Cemetery, located between Sprague and Milan Streets on the edge of the business district of SHREVEPORT, is a historic cemetery boasting its reputations as both the oldest cemetery in the city as well as for holding the remains of a majority of SHREVEPORT's founding families, along with 16 mayors. SHREVEPORT was initially laid out in 1836, with the Fannin Street Cemetery opening shortly afterwards to accommodate the area's dead. This first cemetery quickly filled, however, and in 1847 land was purchased from one Mary Bennett Kane and her father, Dr. Samuel Bennett, for the purpose of establishing a new 10-acre city cemetery. Burials at Fannin Street officially ceased in 1851, and following the Civil War, all graves were reinterred to the city cemetery, where future burials would be held. During the yellow fever epidemic of 1873, around 1,200 were laid to rest within the city cemetery, 759 of which that were placed into a mass grave labeled the Yellow Fever Mound. In 1905, the city cemetery was renamed as Oakland Cemetery. In 1977, Oakland was added to the National Register of Historic Places. Burials, though rare, do still occur at Oakland, though new plot spaces are not available, meaning these burials essentially take place in pre-existing tombs or pre-planned family plots. Oakland remains open to visitors to this day and accommodates an estimated 5,000 bodies, though by some claims that number could be as much as double. A number of restoration efforts have been launched throughout Oakland, the most recent of which was started in 2008 and continues into present times. But sadly, vandalism and neglect are ongoing problems on the prestigious old property. Over its lengthy existence, Oakland Cemetery has picked up a number of local ghost tales and urban legends, and has become something of a rite of passage for paranormal investigators, daredevils, and Shreveport teens looking to prove their mettle. One story tells that the property is haunted by the spirits of those early settlers whose remains were transferred, and many have reported sighting full-bodied apparitions varying greatly in appearance, wandering the grounds in clothing from centuries past, looking lost and confused. Another story tells that a number of ghostly Confederates prowl the graveyard at night. Nathan Goodkind, a Polish immigrant and the owner of a popular dried goods store, was murdered in Shreveport, some say over a gambling debt or maybe for cheating, in 1885, resulting in his burial at Oakland. His ghost has been sighted near his grave and has even been known to make limited conversation with the living. Reported all throughout Oakland is a strange phenomenon from legend called the will-o-wisps, or floating balls of supernatural energy or light, which have been sighted zipping about, usually above graves, and have even been known to chase those with ill intent off the premises. Another tale tells of Cora Lee Wilson, a prominent member of the Shreveport community through the late 19th century, who died at just 22 years in age. A large brick tomb was designed to hold her casket. Strangely, this structure has been reconstructed numerous times, but each time ends up falling apart, leaving her old box exposed. Many have cited Cora's beautiful spirit near her tomb, a concerned expression on her face. Some claim unable to move on until someone builds her a sturdier final resting place. Lastly, near the yellow fever mound, many report the feeling of being closely watched, tapped on the shoulder, or even having their hair played with, and a number have described suddenly feeling so ill they were forced to leave the mound's vicinity. Taking its fascinating yet morbid history into consideration and coupling it with a slew of ghost stories, local legends, and countless disturbing phenomena, Oakland Cemetery seems a fitting final stop for our pick as the most haunted cemetery in Louisiana. Thank you all for tuning in to our list of picks for the most haunted cemeteries in Louisiana. If you enjoyed listening to our histories and ghost stories as much as we enjoyed telling them to you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn notifications on so you know when fresh content is on the way. Throw us a like if you feel we've earned it, and most importantly, share this video and our channel with anyone you think could use a good scare. We'll see you all next time.